Hey everyone, welcome to Phoenix. What if today, we're bringing you an incredible new movie on what if Naruto awakened the power of Ninja Gigai and got Harem? Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before we begin. Let's get into the story. Hitsugaya Toshiro, along with the rest of the captains of the Gode 13, all stood in rows of two. Their commander, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni, stood at the very end, his eyes closed, yet he still exerted a presence that said he watched them all. He stood slightly hunched, leaning on a gnarled staff, yet Toshiro knew that at a moment's notice, he would be able to spring into action. He cleared his throat and spoke, the gruff voice weary with age yet still strong enough to demand respect. I'm sure you're wondering why I have called all of you here today. No one spoke, but Toshiro swore he heard Kuretsuchi whisper from next to, I'll say. I had just begun dissecting, okay. He was sure he had heard it. But it had been so graphic and disgusting that he wished he hadn't. When he was sure he had everyone's attention, Yamamoto continued, we have just received word that an organization is making moves to capture the tailed demons. There were various cries of shock from more outgoing captains, while the more stoic ones showed barely any outward signs of shock. Although Toshiro didn't show it on the outside, he was in a state of panic himself on the inside. He remembered that day quite well. Roughly 11 years ago, when a human had sacrificed his soul in a ritual to summon Shinigami to their world and rid it of a terrible demon. When he arrived on the scene, he had almost puked up his lunch for more than one reason. The first had been the battlefield, littered with dead bodies and stinking something fierce, but the second and most prominent reason was the thing he stood on. It was scaly yet moist, and it seemed to be flying through the air at great speeds. The thing landed on the ground with a crash, Toshiro having barely managed to stay on it. Before he even had time to access the situation, his attention was grabbed by the sounds of vicious snarling. The Kyuubi no Kitsune stood at 100 feet tall, its multiple tails swinging violently behind it and its maw wide open, and its teeth stained red from the humans it ate alive. Its blood-red eyes glinted malevolently and the killing intent was so thick in the air it was almost suffocating. Toshiro narrowed his eyes at it and thought back to what he knew about demons from the academy. They were so rare that he had never actually fought a real one himself, and the first one he did find just happened to be the king of demons. Demons were vastly different from hollows because they couldn't be purified by a Zanpakuto. There were rumors of Shinigami who could do such things, but since he couldn't, the only way was to seal it inside of something. And the only reason someone would summon a Shinigami willingly was. A flash of color to his left caught his attention, and it was then that he realized that he wasn't alone on the giant thing. Another man stood there as well, his clothes like flames flapping in the wind. He turned toward Toshiro and his blue eyes widened in shock. Toshiro returned the stare, wondering if that was the man who had summoned him. He would have asked, but the sounds of destruction and snarling was much too deafening. The blonde-haired man was eyeing him critically, taking in his black-clothed appearance before his eyes drifted down to something he held in his arms. Toshiro followed his gaze and his eyes landed on a small child who was sleeping peacefully despite all the chaos around them. The child was bundled in a blue cloth, and when the man moved it from the baby's belly, an ink seal was revealed having already been drawn on the smooth flesh. Their eyes locked again, and Toshiro already knew what the man wanted him to do. He would have to use a technique that would forcibly remove the Kyuubi's soul, and place it into another host. But, to perform the technique, he would need a willing human soul to do so. It wasn't too bad, if you knew of the afterlife. The only serious drawback was that it would suck out all of the sacrifices Ryotsu, condemning them to the life of a normal soul in Rukongai. The ultimate Kido spell. Number 100. Kushibyu, Black Death. It would leave him drained and bedridden for months afterwards, but it was the only way to stop the Kyuubi from killing any more innocents. He was broken from his musings when Yamamoto had apparently settled everyone down and began to speak again. Right now, we do not know who these people are or what they plan to do with the tailed demons once they are caught. But one thing we do know is who they will target. The old commander paused, letting the implications of his words sink in. He nodded, pleased when looks of understanding began to blossom on everyone's face. As I'm sure you've all realized by now, since we already know who they will target, all we have to do is make sure the Jinchuriki are all thoroughly protected. It was the 13th captain, Yukitake Jashiro, who spoke. So who will go to the human world? Yamamoto looked pensive. It would be rather foolish to send 9 captains to protect all 9 demons since it would leave Soul Society severely underprotected, so, I've decided that we will only protect the last and most powerful demon, the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Chatter was beginning to rise up again, but it was quickly silenced when Yamamoto thumped his staff on the ground. Silence! He roared. By protecting the last and most powerful tailed demon, we can be sure that they will come after it last. He looked at each captain, as if daring them to interrupt. Therefore, we will be able to watch them as they move, tell who their members are and what they plan to do. This time as was the 8th Division captain, Kyoraku Shunsui, who drawled somewhat lazily, so how will we protect the Kyuubi? Yamamoto seemed to smile, judging by the way his mustache twitched upward. Since most humans can't be harmed by Shinigami, and Gigai limit our strength drastically, we have been working on something new that gives us an advantage. He chuckled. Kuretsuchi Taiko, if you will. The captain of the 12th Division sighed, his paint-covered face contorting into a frown. He raised a hand and waved it flippantly. Down in the living world, humans have learned the key to using chakra, the living equivalent of Ryotsu. They have, amazingly enough, the vile things, managed to harness that energy the same way we do. We managed to study a human that used this chakra, and have learned of a way to incorporate the same abilities into a Gigai. We call it Ninja Gigai. All of the captains looked intrigued. Even Toshiro couldn't help but raise a skeptical eyebrow and think, he finally invented something useful for once. Kuretsuchi shrugged. Because I have been, preoccupied with other things, I have only created one. Yamamoto nodded, apparently having already known all of this. And that is why I proclaimed that we will only protect the Kyuubi. When the other captains nodded, he continued. I have contacted an old friend in the human world, and he has been gracious enough to provide us with a position to protect the Kyuubi's container. The mission will be to assume the role as the Kyuubi's sensei, accompanying him outside of the village, allowing you to always be near him. Now, who will be the one to accept? No one moved, some captains exchanging glances with each other warily. Finally, Yukataki Taiko exclaimed, I nominate Shiro-chan. Toshiro Taiko. His alcoholic best, Kyoraku Taiko, seconded it. Toshiro wanted to glare and tell them to all go to hell, but that would be entirely rude. Besides, he was kind of interested in the small baby he had condemned all those years ago. So with his chin raised, Toshiro said, Fine. I accept. The commander of the 13 squads looked vaguely amused. Does anyone object? When no one did, he said finally, Well then, Hitsugaya Toshiro, we'll leave everything up to you. Toshiro and Kuretsuchi, stay, everyone else, dismissed. As everyone filed out of the chamber and Kuretsuchi practically leered at him, Toshiro couldn't help but feel that he'd made a big mistake. Standing in front of a portal to human world, already inside the Ninja Gigai, which wore the same clothes all Shinigami wore with his sword trapped to his back, Toshiro looked at Kuretsuchi who stood beside him with almost pleading ice blue eyes. Wait, isn't this a little soon? I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye? Kuretsuchi sneered. That's the point. We can't have it spreading through all of Soul Society that the captain of the 10th Division is heading to human world for an undisclosed amount of time. But, I don't even know how to work this thing, he cried, motioning to the Ninja Gigai he was in. Sighing as if Toshiro was the most aggravating person in the world, Kuretsuchi explained. It's elementary, really. The Ninja Gigai is unlike a regular Gigai in the fact that it allows you full use of all of your spiritual powers, only it will be converted to chakra. With a normal Gigai, your powers would be sealed, and you have to not only get out of the Gigai to fight, but break the seal holding your powers back as well. Also, the Ninja Gigai has a built-in brain that will allow you to know all of the ninja techniques as if you have been training with them your entire life, while you still keep all of your normal knowledge. Not only that, but it is able to withstand the damaging effects of unleashing Shikai and Bankai. Any questions? Good. And with that, Kuretsuchi pushed the small captain through the portal and into human world, cackling madly as he did so. Landing in human world was a very unpleasant feeling while in the Ninja Gigai. It was as if he was being taken apart bit by bit and then put back together again when he arrived. When it didn't feel like the world was spinning, he looked around the area in which he stood and frowned when he realized that he was inside of a room. Someone behind him coughed and he twirled around quickly. Toshiro stood in front of a wrinkled old man who had a smoking pipe dangling from their lips. The old man had his hands folded together, his chin propped on them as he regarded him with an analytical eye. So, the old man began, puffing on his pipe briefly, "Are you the Shinigami sent here to protect the Kyuubi?" Toshiro started, curious as to how the man knew who he was. He remembered Yamamoto having saying that his old friend would help. Could this man be that friend? They did indeed look the same age, ancient. Besides, he already knew who he was and why he was there. There would be no point in trying to deny it. Nodding, he said simply, "Yes." The old man nodded, as if he knew the answer all along. "My name is Sarutobi Hitsugaya Toshiro." "Well, Toshi-kun. May I call you Toshi-kun? Do you know why you are here?" Where's here?" An amused look on his face, Sarutobi replied, "This is the village hidden in the leaves. The home to none other than the nine-tailed demon's container, Uzumaki Naruto." He nodded. "I am here to protect Uzumaki Naruto from a group that wants to capture the tailed demon inside of him." The old man chuckled, his eyes seeming to twinkle. "Do you know how you will be protecting young Naruto?" "Yes," Toshiro said slowly, "I will take on the position as his teacher." By now the monk's eyes were twinkling so much that he looked like Rangaku after discovering where he hid the liquor. "Is there something I don't know?" he asked finally, not liking the look in the old man's eyes. Before the old man could respond, however, a tanned man with a scar across his nose burst in, his eyes wide and panting slightly. "Hokage-sama." The old man stood up, his entire demeaning seeming to change from pleasant old devil to serious village leader. "Yes, what is it, Iruka?" Naruto." Iruka gasped. He stole the scroll of seals." With a curse, the old man sat back down in his seat and began looking through a crystal ball. Toshiro watched on, not entirely sure what was going on. He turned toward the scarred man and asked, "What's the scroll of seals?" Said man looked at him, curious as of his presence, but he explained, "The scroll of seals is a scroll filled with the village's most powerful techniques. All of those techniques being forbidden." Toshiro crossed his arms and frowned. Did that mean that Naruto stole the scroll for power? He didn't know if he could protect such a person. "Iruka," the old man said, getting both of their attention. No, Toshiro," he amended, turning toward him. Toshiro's eyes narrowed slightly. It looked like the old man was smiling pleasantly. "Naruto is in the forests to the west of here. Will you go retrieve him and the scroll, please?" Iruka began to sputter. But, Hokage-sama." Sarutobi held up a hand and the man instantly quieted. His eyes were locked on Toshiro's and that damn twinkling was back. With a stiff nod of confirmation, he gathered his Reiatsu in his feet and used Shunpo to head west. Back in the Hokage's office, Iruka was left gaping at the spot the newcomer had once been. He had just disappeared, without even a puff of smoke. "Hokage-sama, who was that child?" The old man didn't respond. He just continued to watch his crystal ball, the smirk he had been trying to suppress blossoming full force. Toshiro landed on a tree branch west of the village in a crouch. He kneeled there, searching through the thick foliage for some sign of Naruto. Apparently, to the west of the village was forest. Hell, in every direction it was forest. The village was enclosed in it. It was night outside and the thick canopy above blocked out the moon and any light it would provide, casting the area in which he stood in almost complete darkness. Now that he was out of the village, he could feel a spiritual signature that was different from all the other humans had felt. It still felt like there, only different. It was decidedly more malignant and dark, like a certain fox he had once encountered. But it was muffled, as if something was suppressing it, like a seal. Another smaller spiritual signature was currently heading toward it. With another Shunpo, he headed toward the demonic Reiatsu. Uzumaki Naruto lay down on the ground with a sigh, a sense of accomplishment slowly building within him. He had gotten that scroll no problem. All he had to do was sneak into the vault and take it. It was barely guarded at all. The only real problem he had faced was when a patrolling guard had checked in and spotted him. Luckily, they were male, and a quick Oryoku no Jutsu had them sailing away with twin streams of blood spurting from their nose. When he had arrived at the clearing with the old hut, he had set about learning a technique from the scroll. The very first skill in the scroll had been Cage Bunshin, and clones just happened to be his worst skill. He had been about to skip it when an idea had come to him. What if he could not only learn a skill from the scroll, but a clone technique as well? He had set about learning the skill and it had been surprisingly easy. In no time at all, he had managed to create a clone. They had looked at each other in shock, creator and clone, before they finally screamed in triumph and belly bumped. Unfortunately, the shock was too much for the clone, causing it to disperse, and Naruto to fall flat on his face. But he still deemed it a success. So there he laid, letting the feeling slowly warm his body and soothe away any aches he had gotten from his training. He sat up and was about to start learning another technique when a familiar voice stopped him. Naruto. He looked up, and there stood his white-haired teacher, Mizuki-sensei. Oh, Naruto cried, jumping to his feet and dusting himself off. Mizuki-sensei. Hey, I learned a technique. Does this mean I pass? By the end of his rambling, he was bouncing on the heels of his feet in excitement. Mizuki held out a hand, a grin on his face. Give me the scroll and you pass. Shrugging, Naruto picked up the scroll and was about to hand it over when there was a flash and in front of him stood another white-haired boy wearing some weird robe-like clothing. Wait a minute, white hair. Did that mean he was? Oh my god, Naruto cried, pointing between Mizuki and the newcomer. Mizuki, I didn't know you had a son. They both turned toward him and snarled, idiot. Naruto, the white-haired boy said, walking toward him. Give me the scroll and let's go back to Konoha. Naruto hugged the scroll to his chest and turned away, shielding it with his body. No way, I'm going to give this to Mizuki-sensei, and then I'm going to become a genin. That's right, Mizuki said, still perched on the tree. Give me the scroll, Naruto. The white-haired boy groaned in annoyance and turned to Mizuki. Hey, you! Shut up! The Hokage himself told me to get that scroll and return it. Old man, Naruto asked. He looked hesitantly at the scroll in his hands before they suddenly snapped back to the newcomer and narrowed. Wait a minute, why would that old fart send a little kid like you? Little kid, the kid repeated, his eyebrow twitching. Mizuki sighed in frustration. Screw this. This is taking too long. He grabbed the large shuriken from his back and began twirling it dangerously. Give me the scroll, now, Naruto, or prepare to die. What? Naruto choked, backing up slightly, the scroll clutched tightly in his grip. I get it, the white-haired kid said, his arms crossed and glaring daggers at Mizuki. You tricked him into stealing the scroll for you. Correct, Mizuki laughed, your prize, a painless death. He threw the shuriken at the boy, the spinning blades making a whizzing sound as it sliced through the air. Look out! Naruto cried when the boy didn't move. The boy gripped the sword handle that was strapped to his back, and with a motion that was too quick to follow, the shuriken was cleanly sliced in two, the two pieces going in different directions and colliding with trees. Naruto, the white-haired boy called, breaking him out of his stupor. Take the scroll and run. This is about to get ugly. As if I'd let you. Mizuki cried, jumping into the air and pulling kunai out of the pouch on his thigh. He launched the projectiles toward them and began making hand seals. Shuriken Cage Bunshin no Jutsu. The shuriken that had once been 10 multiplied into 50 and sailed toward them. Toshiro cursed and jumped in front of Naruto. Without even making hand seals he cried, Suiden, Sujinheki. He opened his mouth and a torrent of water surged forth and encased them both in a sphere. The projectiles struck the water, but instead of piercing through it, they were trapped inside. He released the technique and the water and projectiles both fell harmlessly to the ground. Mizuki landed on the ground with a crouch, and was glaring at him in utter hatred. He was panting slightly, his last technique having used a noticeable amount of chakra. Run, Toshiro repeated to Naruto. No, what? I said, no, Naruto repeated, stepping forward determinedly. I'm going to stay and fight. Toshiro looked at Naruto out of the corner, noticing the large amount of energy that the boy was gathering. It swirled around him in blue wisps, even the grass he stood on beginning to sway in the wind he created. He formed a single hand seal. Cage Bunshin no Jutsu. Smoke blanketed the area and there were popping sounds. When the smoke cleared, Both Toshiro's and Mizuki's eyes widened dramatically at what was before them. Standing around them was at least 100 Narutos. Some were on the ground, grinning devilishly, while the rest stood in treetops, striking menacing poses. The forest had went from dark and desolate to covered in orange madness. Wait, Mizuki cried, his eyes wild as he looked at all the Narutos. If you don't do this, I'll tell you. I'll tell you why everyone in the village hates you. Naruto hesitated, all the clones looking at each other and shrugging. The real Naruto, Toshiro guessed, said loudly, I'm listening. Mizuki smirked. 12 years ago, you know about the demon fox being sealed. Of course, Naruto cried, looking as if he was ready to launch at Mizuki any second. Everyone knows. Ah, Mizuki said, standing straight and waving his index finger mockingly. But, you don't know everything. All the Narutos cried, looking at each other in confusion. There was one thing that no one was ever allowed to tell you, and only you. All the clones spoke separately. What, not me? Why not? Mizuki began to chuckle darkly. They were never allowed to tell you, that you were the demon fox. Huh, what do you mean? A single Naruto asked, shocked. Toshiro, having remained idle long enough, stepped forward and growled. Shut up, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. It means, Mizuki continued, ignoring Toshiro completely and looking at who he assumed to be the real Naruto, you are the nine-tailed demon. The same demon that destroyed this village and killed the fourth Hokage. Stop lying, damn it. Toshiro roared, all this time, you've been lied to by everyone all this time. Didn't you find it odd how everyone hated you? Despised your very existence? Why they call you monster, or demon? All the clones that had littered the clearing all vanished in a puff of smoke. Toshiro turned toward Naruto, whose eyes were wide and he was on his hands and knees, tears gathering in his blue orbs. No one will ever accept you, Mizuki cried, taking the time while everyone was distracted to take the remaining large shuriken strap to his back and launch it at a frozen Naruto. It wasn't until Toshiro heard the sound of metal slicing through air that he looked at Mizuki. The projectile was already flying through the air, and without a second thought he used Shunpo to try and push the boy out of the way. He succeeded, but the shuriken ended up embedding itself in his back, luckily missing his spine or important organs. If he had been a regular human, he was sure the blow would have killed him. He kneeled on his knees in front of the shocked boy, blood dripping from his mouth. Why? Naruto choked out, his eyes wide with horror and confusion. Toshiro coughed, blood splattering on the grass. He remembered when he had first saw Naruto as a little baby, the Kyuubi nothing but a pile of ashes, and Naruto, seal glowing red, crying his baby blue eyes out. He remembered leaning down and picking the small baby up, and that the crying had ceased. Those blue eyes had looked up at him, and he had been surprised. Beyond surprised really, for no one should have been able to see him, let alone a small baby. Knowing that the small child would be hated, he had looked at him with pity. They would think of him as nothing but a monster. But he wasn't, and he said so. Because, I know that you're not a monster. He shook his head sadly. It was partially his fault. He had been the one who sealed the monster inside of him after all. I wish I could have done something else, so you wouldn't have to feel like this. Naruto was looking at him in confusion. No doubt, having no idea what he was talking about. But he needed to get it off his chest. It had been eating him from the inside out. Whenever he was congratulated on his defeat of the Kyuubi, he had always thought of that little baby who was no doubt suffering for his success. The blonde-haired boy suddenly scrambled to his feet and took off into the forest, the scroll clutched to him tightly. Toshiro watched him go, not trying to stop him. Mizuki chuckled behind him. Sorry, but now that Naruto knows the truth, he will use that scroll to take revenge on the village. You saw his eyes earlier, those were the eyes of a demon. Toshiro pulled the large shuriken out of his back with a grunt and threw it somewhere in the foliage around him. Panting, he replied, I don't think so. Well, Mizuki shrugged, it doesn't really matter. I'll just kill Naruto and take the scroll anyway. Standing slowly, Toshiro turned toward Mizuki and picked up his sword from where he dropped it. Sorry, he said, leveling the Chunin with his fiercest glare. But I can't allow you to do that. He shifted into a sword stand, his sword pointed downward left and his feet spread. I was going to let you off easy, but then you had to go and piss me off. Ha, what do you plan to do? Mizuki sneered. Bleed over me. No, Toshiro said simply. Something much worse. His sword began to glow a pale ice blue and the wind took on a distinctive chill. Rain over the frozen heavens, Hiranmara. Sarutobi and Iruka were still in the Hokage's office, both of them looking through the crystal ball and watching the scene unfold before them. Iruka had been impressed and amazed when Naruto had covered the entire field in clones, and a feeling like pride had risen within him. It had plummeted, however, when Mizuki told Naruto the village secret. Or at least, his version of it. Mizuki, that bastard. He watched Naruto's reaction, and felt his own heart clench. He wished he could be there, so he could deliver a heartfelt speech and have a heart-to-heart with the boy. When Naruto ran away from the Toshiro, he had seen enough. Hokage-sama, this is too much, for me and for those two kids. I'm going after Naruto. Wait, Iruka, said Sarutobi, his eyes still on Toshiro and his glowing sword. Everything is better this way. Trust me. Besides, you're about to miss the show. Angry, yet curious despite himself, Iruka looked back into the glowing crystal ball and his eyes widened in amazement. Naruto only ran a few feet away from the clearing when he realized that he had abandoned the white-haired kid. He had even risked his life to save him, and how did Naruto repay him? By running away to drown in his own angst. With the scroll clutched tightly in his arms, he headed back towards the clearing, minutely noting that the air felt a lot heavier and colder. He jumped into a nearby tree and peeked around it, noticing that they were still there. He could barely make out the words that they spoke. Rain over the frozen heavens, Hiranmara. A blue wisp of smoke began to curl around the white-haired boy's sword, starting at the hilt and growing larger and larger as it headed toward the tip. When it broke off the tip, a red eye could be seen forming as it began to wrap around Toshiro's body and take shape. Soon a jaw could be seen, and then a head, until a dragon entirely made of ice was coiled around the boy like a snake. Naruto looked on, his eyes wide in shock as he watched the event unfold in front of him. Mizuki scoffed, looking around with an air of boredom. What's this? A genjutsu? He shook his head mockingly. I don't even see why you bother. There's no way that the Kyuubi wouldn't try to use the power for himself. You're right, Toshiro said lowly, yet loud enough that even Naruto could hear it. The words pierced through his heart like an arrow, and he hugged the scroll to himself like it was a lifeline. Even someone he didn't know was admitting it. The demon fox would do that. But Naruto wouldn't because he isn't the demon fox. Toshiro shrugged. I don't know him personally, but he looks lazy, stupid, and clumsy. I'm also sure that everyone hates him, and he knows better than anyone what true heartfelt pain is. He isn't the demon fox, and he never was. He is a member of the Hidden Leaf Village. Hell, he's its hero. He's Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto didn't know when he started crying, but the tears were falling freely down his face as he watched the two men stand off in the clearing. Mizuki made a face of disgust. Whatever. I said that I would kill you last, but I changed my mind. Sighing, the white-haired boy, the first person to ever acknowledge him, said, "Tch. I tire of your yapping." With that, he thrust his sword forward, and the ice dragon that had previously been swaying idly surged forward at great speeds. Mizuki managed to jump out of the way in time, but it caught his leg, encasing it in a block of ice instantly. The dragon maneuvered through the trees with expert precision, zigging and zagging without touching anything. Before Mizuki could even scream, it doubled back around and crashed into him, creating a large pillar of ice and covering the clearing in a thick mist. When the mist cleared, Mizuki was trapped inside a block of ice, his mouth open in eternal horror. Toshiro released a sigh and the dragon dissolved into water. He placed his sword back into its sheath with deliberate slowness and looked over his shoulder. Naruto, I know you're there. Naruto hastily wiped his eyes and jumped from the tree in which he perched, getting his first good look at the ice sculpture Mizuki. I think you went a little too far. Shrugging, Toshiro looked at Mizuki with apathy. Come on. Let's go back to the Hokage's office. What about your wound? Naruto asked, looking at his red-stained Shinigami garb. Ah, it's just a flesh wound. Oh, okay. Naruto, Toshiro, and Iruka all sat in the Hokage's office. The Hokage himself sat behind his desk, puffing on his pipe. The Anbu found Mizuki, Sarutobi said finally. He will probably be dead by the time we can unthaw him, meaning we won't be able to interrogate him. He tried to glare at Toshiro, but it soon fell when he realized it had no effect. He sighed and finally turned his attention to Naruto. Naruto. Why didn't you ever tell me? Naruto demanded. Sarutobi sighed and puffed on his pipe, trying to buy himself some time. I was going to. But you didn't. Naruto interrupted rudely, once again. Naruto. Iruka admonished. The reason you weren't told was because you weren't ready. I wasn't ready, he repeated quietly. I wasn't ready. He jumped out of his seat and smashed his balled fist against Sarutobi's desk, sending his paperwork scattering everywhere. Sarutobi watched as it fell to the floor mournfully. Iruka tried to calm the boy down, but Naruto forged on. I spent all of my life wondering. Always wondering. Wondering why everyone hated me. Wondering why all the adults wouldn't let me have friends. And you tell me I wasn't ready. Naruto, Toshiro said quietly, yet forcibly. Amazingly enough, the boy took one look at the white-haired boy before returning to his seat, his arms crossed and his lips pouted. Sarutobi sighed. You're right, Naruto. I'm sorry. Everyone looked at the old man in stunned silence. I should have told you, but instead, his voice choked slightly. Hey, Naruto said, panicking and feeling guilty for making the old man feel bad. I think you're right. I don't know how I would have reacted if you had told me. I'm sorry. Once more, everyone sat around in stunned silence. Ah, Naruto, Iruka called, hoping to break the tension. I have something for you. He pulled out a brand new leaf forehead protector and handed it to the gobsmacked Naruto. You mean, I can become a genin? Naruto asked, his hands hovering over the proof that he was an official leaf genin. Iruka smiled. Yes, Naruto, you can become a genin. Naruto took it slowly, holding it in his hands as if it was the most precious thing in the world. He took off his goggles and placed them on Sarutobi's desk, before tying the headband around his head and grinning wildly. He jumped out of his seat and whooped loudly. Sarutobi allowed it, watching the boy with a fond smile while Toshiro looked like he wanted to bop the blonde on the head. When Naruto finally calmed down, Sarutobi said, It's late and I think you should be heading home, Naruto. Today was a rather eventful day, and I'm sure that by now you're tired. As if to prove his point, Naruto looked as if he would protest then yawned widely. You have a busy day ahead of you, so you should get a good night's rest. He perked up at the mention of the team assignments the next day, and it wasn't until he was snug in his bed, sleep claiming him, that he realized he didn't get the white-haired boy's name. Back at the Hokage's office, now only Sarutobi, Iruka, and Toshiro remained. Okay, Hokage-sama, who is this child? Toshiro twitched. I'm not a child. Sarutobi chuckled. Indeed, Iruka, he isn't a child. Though he may look young, he is very wise and powerful. Iruka looked dubious. You saw it yourself, didn't you, Iruka? He is very powerful. Nodding somewhat reluctantly, Iruka said, Okay. So he's powerful. By why is he here? Iruka knew he was pushing it, demanding answers from the Hokage in matters that were probably none of his business. But the boy seemed to be involved with Naruto, and Naruto's well-being was his business. Although I can't say much, Sarutobi began, puffing on his pipe, I can tell you that he will be Naruto's Junin instructor. A Junin instructor, but he's just a well-timed glare made him stop in his tracks. But, what happened to Kakashi-sensei? I asked Kakashi if he would be willing to give his sensei position to another, and he readily agreed, because he'd have more free time to read porn, no doubt, Iruka thought viciously. However, in exchange for not having a genin team, he will have to personally train Uchiha Sasuke whenever Toshiro asks. Toshiro, he asked, looking at the white-haired genin sensei. Toshiro merely raised an eyebrow. But, he's not even a Konoha ninja. Iruka cried, grasping at straws. You're right, Sarutobi agreed. Iruka sighed, thinking he had won, when Sarutobi reached into his desk and pulled out another forehead protector. He handed it to Toshiro and said simply, I hereby appoint you the official position as a Konoha Junin. Toshiro took the headband and ran his finger over the inscribed leaf symbol. By now, Iruka was a spluttering mess, and with a sigh, Sarutobi said, "Iruka, if that is all, I would like to talk to Toshiro-sensei alone." Though still looking lost, Iruka bowed and finally left, leaving the two alone. "What was that about?" asked Toshiro, when he was sure the scarred man had finally left. Sarutobi chuckled. "Iruka is just concerned about Naruto is all." A somewhat awkward silence descended upon them, and Sarutobi coughed lightly. "So, you do know that you will be overseeing a 3-man cell, correct?" Now it was Toshiro's turn to sputter. And he did just that. T3. I thought it would just be Naruto. Amused, Sarutobi blew out a puff of smoke. It took all of his willpower not to laugh at finally catching the other man off guard. Instead, he shook his head negative. All Junin sensei are required to take on 3 students, to build teamwork skills and build bonds. Glaring, Toshiro muttered, "So who are the other 2 brats?" This time, Sarutobi did laugh. It was just so amusing to see a boy who looked no older than 15 calling kids who were 12 and 13 brats. He coughed and got himself under control when said boy glared. The other 2 are Rookie of the Year, Uchiha Sasuke, and the top female student, Haruno Sakura. He handed him a folder off of his desk. "This folder contains info on all 3 students you will be teaching. I suggest you study it thoroughly before meeting them tomorrow." Toshiro flipped through the contents, noting that Naruto was apparently the dead last of the academy. He sighed and shook his head. He would have to train him hard if he wanted him to be able to protect himself if he was never around. When Sarutobi thought he had flipped through the folder, he said, "Well, I think that is all. You are to arrive at the Konoha Ninja Academy at 9 a.m. He handed him another folder, this one's decidedly more thick than the last. There's a map of the town included in the folder if you need it. There's also a map of the great shinobi nations and a book of all the most dangerous shinobi alive today. Outside the door, there's a chunin who will show you to your living quarters. There you will find supplies, equipment, and funds should you need them." Done with his long speech, he smiled as if he did things like that every day. With a raised eyebrow, Toshiro looked through the new folder, and indeed, all of those things were included. He nodded once and stood. He walked toward the door and stopped with his hand hovering over the door handle when Sarutobi spoke. "Good luck." Toshiro didn't know if he meant for his mission to destroy the group after the tailed demons or surviving being surrounded by kids. Either way, he knew he'd need it. Toshiro leaned against the wall outside of Naruto's classroom, the other Junin sensei occupying various places throughout the hall. Only 2 particular ninja caught his eye. One was a black-haired man smoking a cigarette. The other was a female ninja with red eyes who was trying to get the smoking man to put it out. The door to the classroom was open, and they could all hear cries of outrage coming from within. Curious, Toshiro peeked inside and immediately groaned. Naruto was making a spectacle of himself, kissing random people and just generally causing a commotion. When everything finally calmed down, Yumino began to assign the teams. As the first 6 teams were called, a butterfly flew by, capturing his attention and making him miss them. Luckily, it had flown away by the time his team was called. Team 7. Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura. Naruto cried out in joy while a girl could be heard groaning, and Uchiha Sasuke. This time it was the other way around, Naruto groaning and the girl cheering. Your Junin instructor will be Hitsugaya Toshiro. Toshiro sighed and adjusted his green flak jacket somewhat nervously. Sarutobi had suggested that since he was masquerading as a ninja, he might as well dress like one as well. He was forced to wear the required dark blue shirt and slacks, his ankles wrapped and his feet adorned with dark blue ninja sandals. His Konoha headband was wrapped around his waist like a belt and his sword, Hiranmara, was strapped securely to his back. It wasn't like he had never taught anyone how to fight before. He was captain of the 10th Division, meaning he had to teach his subordinates all the time. No, it was more the fact that he was always associated with children, making him grow an extreme dislike for them. With one final deep breath, he turned and walked into the classroom. The reactions were instantaneous. Naruto sprung to his feet, pointed a finger dramatically at Toshiro, and yelled at the top of his lungs, "You!" Haruno Sakura, the overly pink girl, widened her eyes and it looked like she was drooling. Uchiha Sasuke narrowed his eyes, no doubt wondering how someone so young had managed to become a Junin, while he, the great Uchiha prodigy, was forced to become a genin. Hey, Toshiro greeted casually. Team 7. The three nodded. Meet me on the roof. He turned and began walking towards the roof, his team following behind him and whispering amongst themselves. Wow, the only female on the team said breathlessly. He's so young, I can't believe he's already a Junin. Cha, and it doesn't hurt that he's hot either. She gasped suddenly and grabbed onto Sasuke's arm. Though I'm sure he's not as great as you, Sasuke-kun. Sasuke merely glared and grunted. I'm so lucky, Sakura squealed, causing Sasuke to wince. I'm going to be surrounded by cute boys. Take that, Ino pig. You think I'm cute, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked hopefully. In your dreams, Naruto. Naruto slumped dejectedly, although he was still pretty intrigued by their new white-haired instructor. He was positive that it was the same man who had saved him from Mizuki before. And he had used that super cool ice dragon to do so. Thankfully, before any more bantering could happen, they had reached the top of the roof. Outside, the sky was partially obscured by clouds and the wind blew occasionally. The sun was high in the sky, warming them. Toshiro walked over to the edge, admiring the view of the village before sitting down and facing his students. Sit down. They all sat. He had bought that book, Teaching Ninja for Dummies, just in case he needed it, and had luckily managed to read a little of it before meeting his team. The first lesson was to establish a connection with your team. Toshiro began, somewhat unnerved under their expectant looks. First let's start with introductions. What do you want to know? Sakura asked. How about? Toshiro shrugged. Your likes, dislikes, dreams, hobbies, and that stuff. Why don't you go first, sensei? I'm Hitsugaya Toshiro. I like snow, watermelons, and peace and quiet. I dislike extremely annoying people. He glanced at Naruto. Dreams. I guess I don't have any. As for hobbies, guess I don't have any of those either. He might look young, Naruto whispered to his team, but he acts like an old fart. Toshiro glared and Naruto eeped. Okay then, you introduce yourself. Naruto grinned and crossed his arms. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, and more ramen. I dislike the time it takes to cook ramen, when I'm out of ramen, and any food that isn't ramen. And he tried to talk about me. Toshiro thought, staring at Naruto with a deadpan expression. My dream is to become Hokage. Naruto cried out passionately, fiddling with the headband around his head. The steel glinted in the sunlight. Then all the villagers will have to respect me. Toshiro couldn't help but look at the boy with a hint of respect and pity. However, it disappeared when Naruto said his hobbies were playing pranks. He better not do any pranks while I'm around. He nodded to Sasuke. Next. Sasuke closed his eyes and folded his hands together. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I dislike everything and like nothing. My ambition is to resurrect my clan and to kill a certain someone. Naruto scooted away, a nervous look on his face as if that someone was him. Eyes narrowed, Toshiro studied the boy in front of him carefully. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about him seemed off. And his ambition intrigued him. He would have to do a little background check on the boy later. Sakura, however, seemed to be starstruck. She was looking at Sasuke in open admiration. Okay, he turned toward Sakura. And last, I'm Haruno Sakura, and I like squeal. My dream for the future. She blushed and looked ready to faint. I dislike Naruto and Ino pig. Naruto slumped. My hobbies are watching Sasuke, stalking Sasuke, fighting with Ino over Sasuke. She continued on to list her numerous, and creepy Sasuke-obsessed, hobbies. Toshiro sighed as the girl continued to ramble on. She reminded him slightly of Rangaku in the way that she would rather be doing anything besides what they're supposed to. The only difference being that when push came to shove, Rangaku could at least become focused and fight seriously. Sakura, however, it looked as if he'd have to really push her if he wanted her to be a successful ninja. And collecting everything that Sasuke touches, Sakura finished, finally. Okay, cried Toshiro, waking Naruto and Sasuke from the light doze they had fallen into. Now that introductions are out of the way, let's move on. What is it? Huh, Naruto asked, swaying from side to side in excitement. Are we going to get our first mission? Well, actually, Toshiro began, this team will be different. Different? Sakura asked. How? Well, most genin teams are usually given a test to see if they can officially become genin. But, sensei, I thought we became genin when we left the academy. Yeah, Naruto agreed. Sasuke just grunted his agreement. Technically, you aren't genin until your Junin sensei approves it by having you pass a test. What? Naruto looked panicked. More tests? Sakura asked curiously. What kind of tests? Toshiro shrugged. A test of your abilities and if you qualify with their standards of what it means to be a genin. That is why I say you three are special. They all looked at him inquiringly. You three won't have to take a test, meaning that you are already genin. He smiled, hoping to make it look as sincere as possible. Not only was he too lazy to come up with an actual test, his mission would crumble if Naruto and his team failed to become genin. They all cheered. But Sasuke only did it on the inside. We'll meet tomorrow at Training Ground 16 at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, Toshiro said once they'd all calmed down. You're dismissed. The genin of Team 7 stood and headed downstairs, chattering amongst themselves excitedly. Actually, it was Naruto and Sakura talking with Sasuke just grunting. When Toshiro was sure that they had finally left, he called, "You can come out now." There was a puff of smoke in front of him, and when it cleared, a man with spiky silver hair stood there. He had a dark blue face mask covering his mouth and over his left eye was his leaf headband. He wore traditional dark ninja garbs. Toshiro watched the man with apathy, but was ready to spring into action at a moment's notice if he made one hostile move. Hey, the man said cheerfully, his one visible eye curved. He waved his hands in front of him defensively. I'm a good guy, see. He pointed towards his leaf headband. Toshiro nodded, but didn't relax his position. Just the other day, another leaf ninja had tried to kill him. And their hair colors look awfully similar as well. Who are you? He asked, taking in the newcomer's lazy posture. Hatake Kakashi. Well, Hatake, if you're such a good guy, then why were you spying on me and my students? Hatake shrugged and reached into a pouch on his hip. Toshiro stiffened, preparing for an attack, but relaxed when it was revealed to be just an orange book. The masked Junin flipped the book open, placed it in front of his face, and looked at him over it. Jumpy much? Just answer the question, Toshiro growled, annoyed. Hatake hummed. He began to read his book, his eyes scanning the pages while he stood there with his free hand shoved into his pocket. I was curious. Toshiro was sure that by now, his eye was twitching. He had hardly known the guy for 1 minute, and already he was managing to annoy him. Curious about what? Another shrug. Oh, just the fact that a mysterious ninja appears out of nowhere, becomes a Junin, and manages to get a position as an instructor. He looked up and regarded him with a half-lidded eye. Also, no one has ever heard of you. If you think I'm some enemy ninja, Toshiro began, glaring, let me alleviate your fears now by saying I'm not. Ah. Hatake returned his attention to his book titled, Ika Ika Paradise. Who said anything about you being an enemy ninja? He crossed his arms. Why else would you be here interrogating me? Interrogating you? Hatake asked, looking at him from over his book once again, lazy confusion in his voice. Isn't it the other way around? With a frustrated groan, Toshiro stood and shook his head. I'm leaving. He jumped off the rooftop, gathering energy in his feet to cushion the fall. On the ground, he shoved both hands into his pockets and began walking away. Not even a second later, he felt a familiar spiritual signature, and walking beside him was no other than Hatake Kakashi, still reading that stupid book casually. Toshiro stopped in the middle of the road and glared. Why are you following me? Are you some type of psycho stalker? Why do you think that? Hatake asked, stopping as well, yet still reading his book. Maybe my way home just happens to be this way. The eye twitching was back, this time in full force. Do you take some type of sick pleasure from annoying people? Yes, he answered simply. Giving up with a frustrated sigh, he began walking once again, intent on ignoring the book-reading ninja. Hopefully he would give up soon and go away. Let's get something to drink. Having enough, Toshiro rounded on the man and exclaimed loudly, "What is wrong with you?" Everyone on the street stopped to stare at them, wondering what was going on. Women began to talk to each other behind their hands, looking at them, and men just stared curiously, wondering if they were about to fight. Seeing all of the unwanted attention on him, embarrassed and annoyed, he finally growled, "Fine. But afterwards you have to leave me alone." Smiling, Hitaki nodded and led them into a small wooden restaurant. It was old, the wood beginning to peel back. Inside was hardly any better. There were no windows, instead they had cut out square holes along the wall for light. It was practically empty, but the people who were there looked like drunks. They picked a small table near the front of the restaurant and sat down. A waitress came over, wearing a pink and yellow yukata. She smiled at them, a pad in her hand and a pencil behind her ear. "Welcome to Kasumi's kitchen. Are you ready to order?" Hitaki nodded, setting the orange book on the table and turning toward the waitress. "I'll just have a glass of warm sake, thank you." He smiled, causing the woman to swoon. Blushing, the waitress wrote down the order with the pencil from behind her ear. When she turned to Toshiro, however, her awestruck smile fell. "Is this your son?" "No," Toshiro hissed, glaring at the waitress and turning it on the masked Junin when he chuckled. Her blissful smile returned. "Oh, good, so what can I get you?" "Watermelon," Toshiro answered simply. "What?" Toshiro's glare intensified. "I want watermelon." "Oh okay then," the waitress eeped, quickly writing the order in her pad, coming right up. "So," Toshiro began when the waiter left, "why did you bring me here?" Hitaki picked up his book from the table and began to read. "Do I need a reason to get to know a fellow Junin and Konoha ninja better?" He rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "But that's not why you brought me here. Can't you at least attempt to be civil?" "No," Toshiro smirked. Hitaki shut his book with a snap and stored it away. "Fine then." His entire demeanor seemed to change. He was still slouching lazily and his single eye was still half-lidded, but it seemed sharper. More piercing. They sat in silence, Toshiro staring at the other man, wondering what he wanted. The tenseness was broken, however, when the waitress returned, setting a cup of sake in front of Hitaki and a plate filled with seedless watermelon slices in front of him. Everything seemed to disappear but him and the watermelons. He dove into them, picking up his first slice and almost ing when the taste assaulted his taste buds. It had just the right amount of sweetness and just the right amount of juice. He was so lost in fruity flavor that he jumped when Hitaki spoke. "You really love watermelons, huh?" Glaring, Toshiro wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and placed the watermelon rind back on the plate. "Where I come from, watermelons are rare." And it was true. In Soul Society, it was harder to grow living things in a dead world, so fruit were very hard to come by. Hitaki took a sip of his sake, not even bothering to remove the mask covering his mouth. "Aren't you going to take that off?" Toshiro asked, looking pointedly at his face mask. Eyebrow raised, Hitaki touched his face mask as if he didn't even realize it was there. "Oh, no need, it's not as if I'm eating or anything." As if to prove his point, he took another sip of the clear liquid. Now curious, Toshiro looked at his remaining watermelon slice, an idea sparking in his head. He pushed the plate towards Hitaki. "They're very delicious. You should try it." "Oh, no, thank you, I'm not hungry." Even more curious, Toshiro narrowed his eyes slightly, watching the masked man take another sip from his cup. "I insist. I had a large breakfast." He was becoming increasingly annoyed. Curiosity and annoyance battled, curiosity winning. Hitaki spying on him and his team flashed in his mind. He obviously wanted to know something if his previous actions were anything to go by. If you take one bite of that watermelon, I'll answer one of your questions honestly." Hitaki looked surprised. He finally shrugged and nodded a confirmation. "Here's your bill," the waitress said, appearing out of nowhere and placing said item on their table and walking away. The unexpected appearance had made him look away for a second, and when his attention returned to the man in front of him, the watermelon was gone, only a husk the rind remaining. Kakashi was already pulling his mask up, his eye curved upward happily. You were right. It was very delicious." Toshiro gaped, his eyes staring at the eaten watermelon. But how could he have done that? He had only looked away for a second. That was definitely not enough time for him to pull down his mask, eat, chew, swallow, and then put his mask back into place. Yet he had done it. So, Hatake began, breaking him from his musings about that one question. But, I mean, that's not fair. I didn't even get to see your face. The deal was that if I ate the watermelon, you'd answer any question I asked, correct? Once again, Toshiro glared at the eye-smiling man. He must have tricked him or something. There was no way he had eaten that watermelon. But the rind was there, teeth marks lining it. Proof that someone ate it. He crossed his arms, sulking. Fine. What's your question? What is your purpose for being in this village? Hatake asked, that piercing look once again returning to his eyes. Toshiro narrowed his eyes. Deciding it would just be easier to tell the truth, Toshiro shrugged. I'm here to protect Uzumaki Naruto. Hatake's visible eye widened minutely before returning to its half-lidded state. From what? Smirking, Toshiro leaned forward as if he was about to divulge secret information, causing Hatake to lean in as well. The reason I'm here, he began lowly, is none of your business. He leaned back in his seat, a cheeky grin on his face as he watched Hatake's eye twitch. Besides, I only said I'd answer one of your questions. He stood up from his seat and began to walk away, leaving a gobsmacked Hatake behind. When he was at the doorway he called over his shoulder, thanks for lunch. He felt Hatake's gaze on his back as he walked down the street. The sensation didn't disappear until he turned the corner. The next day, Toshiro arrived at Training Field 16 at the time he had specified, and was silently pleased to see that his genin team had listened and was already there. The sun was high in the sky, illuminating the field in which they stood. The field was surrounded by trees from all sides, and in the far right was a large lake, the sunlight reflecting off the surface. The sounds of the forest around them completed the scene. Sasuke was sitting in a high tree branch, while Sakura was under him trying to get his attention. Naruto was sitting under the tree next to it, glaring at Sasuke as if it was his fault that Sakura paid attention to him. Hello, Toshiro greeted, turning on his trainer mode, which he used when he trained new recruits of his division in Soul Society. Glad to see you're all on time. Yes, Toshiro-sensei, Sakura chirped, finally giving up on Sasuke. Sensei, Naruto called loudly, are we getting our first mission today? Huh. Toshiro glared at him, making the boy calm down immediately. No, not yet, you all won't be doing any missions for a long time. What? Naruto exclaimed. Sakura looked confused while Sasuke was sending him a glare of death. Oh, I'm sure you'd all like to walk someone's dog, Toshiro said, sarcasm coloring his voice, or carry someone's groceries, and if you're lucky, you might even get to chase a cat. What do you mean, sensei? Sakura asked. Toshiro sighed and explained. Genin is the lowest ranking ninja title, and they usually get the scrap missions which involve doing helpful things around the village. He looked at each of them. Naruto and Sasuke wore looks of disgust, and Sakura had her mouth in an oh. I, however, think they are a waste of time. Time that we will be using to train instead. When you all are stronger, then we'll see about getting you higher ranking missions. Like saving princesses or fighting strong people. Naruto and Sasuke looked thoroughly appeased while Sakura looked hesitant. Sighing, Toshiro added, and saving princess. She immediately perked up. It was so easy to manipulate his team. Okay, now before we can train, I need to know all of your strengths and weaknesses. So, I'm going to fight all of you one-on-one. I'll only use my hands to make it fair. Who wants to go first? Unsurprisingly, both Naruto and Sasuke raised their hands at the same time, and then they turned to each other and glared. Toshiro looked between the two. Sasuke first. Sasuke smirked and hopped down from the tree while Naruto continued to glare, his arms crossed sulkily. Don't hold back, Toshiro said, watching Sasuke shift into a fighting stance. Begin. Sasuke charged forward, but before he could get very far, there was a puff of smoke in front of him. When the smoke cleared, Hatake Kakashi stood there, his familiar orange book held in his hand. Yo, he greeted lazily, what did I miss? You, Toshiro cried, pointing in a manner similar to Naruto from the day before. What are you doing here? Sasuke glared at the newcomer, no doubt pissed that someone had interrupted his battle. Hey, Naruto called loudly, who's the masked freak? Hatake turned and regarded Naruto with his half-lidded stare. This, masked freak's, name is Hatake Kakashi, and I'm your assistant Junin instructor. Everyone stared at the silver-haired man and exclaimed loudly, fought. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.